Hello friends, as we start our test series, I will be taking the test series discussions. But before taking the discussion for the first test, I would like to clarify some of the things. First, most important thing is when we are taking discussions, when I am taking discussion, what are the important things which I will be focusing and what are the things which I will be focusing while evaluating answers. So when I am saying that what are the things which will be discussed, I am focusing on the concepts part, the broad thinking which must be reflected in your answers, and the interlinkages within the subject and outside the subject. These are the things which I will be discussing in this part. And the other things like how to give good introduction and conclusion and presentation part. All these things will be mentioned in evaluation. Why I am saying this thing that I am not going to discuss this introduction and conclusion part here, because if anyone is having a clear understanding of the subject, then it will be easy for him to give introduction and conclusion. It is like this: if an individual is able to give introduction and conclusion to 1, 2, 3, 4 questions of a subject, he will be having capability to give in all these things in other questions also. It is very rare that an individual who is comfortable in many questions will be uncomfortable in few. Also, the minute details of any question, like suppose in any question government has taken some of the initiative related to that sector, and if those initiatives are not asked, I am not going to provide those details. It is expected that the aspirants will themselves go through those details and whenever needed will mention those details in their answers. Now, when we are talking about first test, in this first test 3 areas were covered: modern India, world history and geography. Before going to each and every individual question of the test series, I would like to cover the broad concepts of modern India and world history from which questions were asked in this test. Now when I am saying that modern India and world history, what this history says or history signifies that how the economic, political, social, ethical systems of different regions evolved through time, how they functioned during different time periods. This is your history. And when we are talking about the performance of systems, within this I would like to specify that when we are talking about history, we are concerned about the performance of different societies in different regions, how they were interacting. And within those interactions, there are 4 modes of interaction. What are they? The societies can cooperate with each other, they can compete with each other, they can have conflicts with each other, and one of the society can dominate another society or a combination of another societies. So these 4 are the broad combinations how societies interact with each other, and generally this interaction moves from one mode to another. Initially they will cooperate, then they will compete, then they will conflict, and then they will dominate. And within these interactions, I have identified 4 broad processes through which they interact. First is through the value system of societies, then through military systems, then through economic systems, and then by manipulating the internal divisions of any society. And why I have taken these four combinations? Because when we read Kautilya, he specifically says that Sam, Dam, Danda, Bhed are the four important methods through which power can be exercised. And when different societies are cooperating, competing, or having conflict and domination, they are exercising their influence or power over others, and these four are the methods through which those interactions will be carried out. Now, as I am discussing question about modern India and world history, why I am focusing on these things? I am focusing on these things because when we say that in modern Indian history is history of Indian freedom struggle. But if we paint this freedom struggle into broader canvas, I would like to say it was not the freedom struggle from Britishers. It was a freedom struggle in which Indians were trying to move away from some bad habits or deficiencies in their economical, political, ethical, socio-religious systems. And that's why I'm specifically mentioning these things, that British and India were interacting in different spheres and through different modes. And within these modes, Britishers were dominating India. And whenever any society is being dominated, this society will try to give response. The society which is being dominated will try to give response, and whether that response will be successful or not, that will be determined, that response is in a holistic manner or not. It has attacked the roots of dominance or not, otherwise the response will fail. Now, as I have given you these broader parameters, I am again coming back to the Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed part. Sam part, we can say that Britishers when they came to India, or Europeans when they came to India, they said that these backward societies are white man's burden and they have a responsibility to improve the conditions of these societies. And they said that our civilization, that British civilization or European civilization, is an advanced civilization, and that's why it is their responsibility that we will be telling these backward societies what is good for them. We will be providing direction to them, and that's why they must accept our rule. Through economic domination, through capitalist economic system, they dominated over these societies. They had advanced military, that's why they were able to defeat different kings of these societies, and they also manipulated the internal divisions of these societies, and because of these things they were able to dominate over these societies in Africa, Asia and India specifically for very long duration. In response to this, different efforts were taken by Indians. Those efforts belong to different categories. Now, if we look at the responses which were given by Indians, they were focusing on socio-religious reforms, military aspects, political aspects, and all other aspects. However, these responses evolved through time. Initially, Indians focused on reforming their socio-religious systems. Then they focused on improving their political systems. And as above I said, that whether response will be successful or not will depend upon whether the response is in a holistic manner or not, whether it attacks the root cause or not. With this broad understanding, now I am going to come to the questions which were asked in this test paper. First, we will be focusing on modern India question. If we focus on modern India questions, first I will be saying that what are the different questions which have been asked. If we look at the different questions which were asked, the first important question was about 1857 revolt. Another question was asked was peasants movements. Another important question was asked the change in direction of Indian freedom movement during 1920s and 30s. Another important question was asked about the leadership provided by Gandhi and Nehru. And two another questions focused on how Britishers were able to dominate India. And the specific questions were about British economic policies and overall policy of British to dominate India. These were the questions asked. Now when we are saying, I'm here in this part, I will again provide you a holistic viewpoint of the Indian response. And whenever such questions are asked, how to respond to such questions. But before talking about Indian response, we must focus on these two aspects which have been asked in today's questions: the economic policies of British and overall British policy. When we are talking about these two policies, we must remember that they were focusing initially on competition, then conflict, and then finally dominating Indian people. These policies evolved through this. Britishers were always having in their mind that they have to dominate India. That's why they were focusing on conquering India through every means, through political means, through military means, and through economic means. And that's why they were having always one single objective, and every part of their economic policy, Indian provincial policy, political policy was aimed at this ultimate end. And when we talk about India's response to these things, when we are talking about Indian response, the questions which have been asked was about 1857 revolt. And we must remember it was a military response. The military response did not attack on the root cause of British domination over India. And that's why its ultimate end will be a failure. But it inspired Indian generation. That is the positive we can take from it. Along with this, another question which has been asked is about peasants movement. When we are talking about peasant movement, it again says that peasant movements were focused on the immediate goals. And what were their immediate goals? Because peasants were being exploited by local zamindars or moneylenders, they focused on those things. They didn't have an overall view of how capitalism is working, how colonialism is working, and that's why they were never attacking the root cause. And if they are not attacking the root cause, again, they are bound to fail. But if we look at the peasant movements which were taken over 1920s, 40s, they had political support, They knew that some of the problems of peasants were because of capitalism, were because of problems of division of resources, and that's why they were able to get some good results. Another two questions which were focused on leadership role provided during India's response. These included the role of Gandhi, role of both Gandhi and Nehru, how they differed with each other. In this, I would like to say that there are always differences of opinion, and these differences of opinion can be from religious viewpoint, political viewpoint, economic viewpoint, and they both differed. Nehru and Gandhi both differed on these 2 points, but they ultimately realized that they may be having different paths, but their ultimate goal is the same, and that's why they must collaborate together, and therefore they work on the principles of respect and tolerance for each other views. Whereas in the question that how Gandhi was able to turn India's movement into a mass movement, we must focus on those things. That a leader, he gives a vision to the society to which the society can identify itself. And if any society can identify to the leader's vision, they will support him, and any such initiative will have mass followership. The kind of initiatives which are taken by Gandhi, whether it is Salt Satyagraha, Champaran, Kheda, in each of his initiatives, he had the benefits of masses into his mind, and he worked ethically on those objectives, and that's why he was able to convert Indian freedom movement into a mass movement. When we are talking about all these things, we are saying that by 1947, Indian system has evolved up to such a level that it was able to challenge British. Britishers said that we have modern political institutions, we have a modern society, we have a modern economy. By 1947, India said that no, whatever systems you are saying you have, they are fraud. You do not have the ethical base to say these things. Why? Because Britishers said that we have principles of equality, liberty and freedom, but Indians said that you are selfish in implementing those principles. They are meant for you only, you are not going to apply these principles to others. That's why your rule is immoral and your rule must end. India challenged them ethically, morally. At the same time, in economic sphere, though India was not that good, but some broader economic principles were identified, that how Indian economy was going to work after independence. And based on these parameters, India challenged Britishers, and Britishers could not stand against Indian challenge, and they had to leave India. When I am saying, why I am saying all these things? Because these principles, which were Indian civilization's principles throughout history, that they believed in equality of each and every individual, of each and every nation, these were reflected into non-alignment movement after independence, which said that each and every country must be treated equally. They must focus on development. They must focus on cooperation, not division among themselves or conflict among themselves. All the countries must focus on collaboration and not domination. And that's why the question was that how the name was not an immediate response to the situations which were present during that time, but it has its root in India's history and civilization, and specifically India's political history of freedom movement. But at the same time, when I say these principles, were an important part or an integral part of India's foreign policy. They were not only part of India's foreign policy, but overall system. But the future was also going to have some important lessons for India. That simply a system which is built on trust cannot be successful if both the sides are ready to implement that system. And it was because of this failure of this new system built on trust, built on equality, built on dignity of each and every nation, failed during 1948, during 1965 and during 1971. All these, during these 3 years, India had wars with Pakistan. Because both the countries had different objectives. India wanted a peaceful rise, but Pakistan was not interested in peaceful rise. It wanted to get hold of some territory which belonged to India and wanted to dominate its own people. And this resulted into 3 different wars. But the 1971 war was again a realization by both the countries that this is the time for development. We must focus on economic upliftment and should resolve each and every dispute through peaceful manner in a bilateral manner. And that resulted into Simla Agreement of 1972. But this agreement was again a failure because the peace along LOC has not been established. Ceasefire violations are a continuous process, and Pakistan several times has raised the issue at multilateral fora. And it again says that though some of the principles they are good to be praised, but in practice some of those principles need to be abandoned. This is a broad overview of Indian history which has been asked in this test question. Now when I am moving to world history, again initially I will be going to provide you some of the broad vision which has been reflected through today's questions. In this, when we were talking about that in the initial part, we said that societies always interact with each other. We also say that societies evolve from one system to another. And the modern history of the world after Industrial Revolution is a history which shows that how different societies change from one system to another. Before Industrial Revolution, the societies were described by that power was exercised by rulers who were authoritarian. They believed in certain privileges which were enjoyed by some sections of the society, and no common man was treated as subject who does not have any kind of rights. And after Industrial Revolution, because of various advancements, this form of society changed into a new form of society in which the new form of ideas came. The most important idea was of a nation, and along with nation, the state system emerged, and it resulted into evolution of nation-state system. In this nation-state system, people were treated as citizens, and these citizens had certain rights which were inalienable. These rights included right of equality, freedom, and the power which was exercised by the state was not absolute, it was limited. It was limited by fundamental rights, it was limited by written constitution, and it was limited by separation of power through judicial review. And this resulted into establishment of democratic form of governments in which the rulers were not absolute. Now when these societies moved from one form to another. Initially, one society evolved, then by looking at that evolved system and the benefits that evolved system provided to its citizens, other societies started evolving, and that resulted into a series of revolutions. We had American Revolution, we had French Revolution, we had Russian Revolution, and each and every revolution tried to improve upon the previous revolutions, tried to work upon the deficiencies of the previous revolution, and its best example is Russian Revolution. Because French Revolution and American Revolution, they provided political freedom, they provided political equality, but the socio-economic equality and freedom were missing. The Russian Revolution focused on the justice part, economic justice, social justice. And that's why those two questions were asked. Along with this, when these societies evolved, it has been said that though many of those principles, they were written in books, they were written in constitutions, but in the mindset of the people, inequalities were still there and they are still there. And that's why we had American Civil War, and at present also we are having black right movement, because whatever was written in books was not accepted by people in reality. And that's why I have written here, whenever one society moves from one system to another, there is need for new institution and there is need for new ideas. But these new institutions are not always performing well. They are not able to evolve according to the ideas. And sometimes the new ideas, they are not accepted by the people. And that's why there can be civil wars in a society. There can be conflicts about the ideas within the society. And American Civil War was a reflection of that system. Along with this, when these new societies evolved, initially one nation state come, then there were many nation state systems. Initially, the beginners thought that this new system is very good and that's why it must be implemented all over the world. And they started supporting each other. The earlier nationalists supported the nationalist movement in different countries. But when many nation states emerged, ultimately again, the competition among these nation states started. Conflict among these nation states started, and that resulted into different world wars and other wars. All these were because of the competition and conflict, which is always a phenomenon of any kind of society, because a society sometimes feels that I am superior. Sometimes it is being threatened by other society, and in any of these conditions, wars are going to happen. So with this broader understanding that how different systems are working, if you have this broader understanding of these things, you will be able to give good introduction, good conclusion, and you will be able to answer any kind of question which comes in the exam. Here I have discussed only the conceptual part, how to present these things, how to get extra marks. Those things will be provided you, will be given you as feedback in your individual paper. Now when I have discussed all these things, I will be coming to the individual questions for discussion. Now, initially I will be discussing history questions, then after that I will be discussing geography questions. I have not provided a broader overview of the geography because some of the questions are asked from physical geography, then from human geography and economic geography. And I hope that those aspects are already clear to you. And I have not discussed some details of those things, but I will be discussing individual questions. Now when we are talking about history, my first question is, which I have taken for discussion, These questions which I am taking for discussion are not in the same order as given in test series because I have tried to link them individually. First question which I am discussing is, despite immense divergence in outlook, attitude and philosophy, Gandhi and Nehru worked together to provide a robust vision to national movement. Comment. When I am saying comment, it simply means that certain statement has been given. What are your views about this thing? You have to comment your views. Now when we are saying that the question asks that both had divergence in outlook, attitude and philosophy, but they work together to provide a robust vision to national movement. Now in this question we must focus on what were the attitudinal differences, philosophical differences of Gandhi and Nehru towards society, that how society must be structured, what were their views about that thing. If we look at those things, in the structure, that what were their views about the structure of a society, we can focus on religious aspects, what were their views on religious aspects, then political aspects, then economic aspects, the means which were to be used to achieve those structures. When we are saying these things, we must focus that Gandhi was a religious person. He even believed in the Varnashram system. He has ultimate faith in the teachings of Gita. Nehru had a secular outlook. He was extremely focused in modern concepts of secularism, rational thinking and all these things. And he said that Indians must move away from religious obscurantism, Andhvishwas, all these things, if they have to evolve as a modern society. In terms of power, Gandhi said that decentralization of power in India, the strengthening of Panchayati Raj system is very much important. But Nehru said India is a diverse country. The divisions within India, the caste-based divisions, the religion-based divisions, region-based divisions, all these divisions demand that power must be centralized and that centralized power must work towards removing these divisions. Then again, economic vision. Within economic vision, Gandhi again had vision of cottage industries, rural industries, small-scale industries, agro-based industries. Gandhi's vision was the empowerment of each and every individual. That if each and every individual is empowered, he will be able to take care of himself. He will be able to exercise his freedom. But Nehru again in this economic aspect said no. India is a poor country, and if it has to move ahead, it must take steps towards quick industrialization. And he was an ardent follower of socialism, and he had a firm belief in planned economic transformation. And that's why he focused on big industries. He focused on nationalization. He focused on public sector enterprises, and all these were tools of economic transformation according to him. Gandhi was a completely ethical man. He said that if I believe in something, I will follow that thing. I am not going to play politics with these things. And that's why he said that if I have chosen a good end, my means should also be good. I cannot have illegal means to achieve a good end. And that's why many times when Indian freedom movement was turning violent in 1922, he backed out. During Second World War, he said that we should not take benefit of the precarious situation in which Britishers are. Because he said that my means should be as good as ends. But Nehru was not in tune with Gandhi in these aspects. And that's why we can say that both of them had different outlooks, philosophical outlook, attitudes about different situations. But they never allowed such differences to come in path of India's freedom struggle, in successful evolution of India's freedom struggle. They kept their differences away, they collaborated with each other on different aspects. Though Nehru had differences over during Chora Chori movement and Second World War, but he ultimately accepted Gandhi's view. He said that okay, he is a senior man, he is having vast followership. Along with this, he has firm belief in Gandhi's vision, and that's why he always accepted his viewpoints. And in this way, we can say that despite having different views, they collaborated with each other in helping Indian masses to improve their situation, helping Indian society to improve itself and to challenge British domination, which ultimately resulted into India getting independence from British. In this question, all these things have been given in model answer. You can refer minute details to these in that answer. Now I am coming to second question. The second question is, the revolt of 1857 was a heroic effort on the part of old social class to replace align rule and restore status quo ante. Do you agree? The question is asking you that whether you agree that the 1857 revolt was an effort on the part of old social class to replace the aligned rule and restore status quo ante. The question is simply asking whether you believe that the movement was led by old social class and which was trying to establish the old social system and associated institutions, or do you think that the institutions which were being proclaimed by that old social class were new institutions? And when we look at the 1857 revolt leadership, it was provided by Bahadur Shah Zafar, Nana Sahib, Kunwar Singh, and many of these were either deposed rulers or landlords who belonged to the old aristocracy or monarchy, whose powers were taken away by Britishers, and they were attempting to regain those powers using the emotions of the masses. Masses were feeling economic hardships, their religious feelings were being hurt, and because of this, both these old social systems combined and tried to establish the old order. And that were the main reasons that all of the social classes did not support 1857 revolt, because the leadership did not provide a progressive vision. It was not able to tell what kind of new system we are going to establish, and many felt that the kind of things Britishers are doing in India, they are very much good for India, and that's why we should not support these old classes. And that's why the movement was divided, and it was not successful in political terms. Though ideologically, psychologically, and motivational. If you look at motivational things, it was successful because it motivated the masses. It motivated the freedom movement leaders in 20th century. That India has made such efforts back in 1857, and we must again take the initiative and throw the British rule. In this question, you must mention on the things that this colonial apparatus of British was exploiting all social classes. They alienated every single section of the society, and it was cause of misery, and that's why many social classes united to overthrow Britishers. But its leadership was provided by old social class, which were disgruntled by the British policies. And they tried to establish the medieval form of society and government as it existed before. You have to write these things in this question. Now, next question is, Indian national movement received a new economic outlook under the socialist leadership of the Congress. Describe the role played by socialists in establishing new economic agenda with nationalist movement. The question is talking about first, new economic outlook under socialist leadership, role played by socialists in establishing new economic agenda within the national movement. So, first you have to mention what was the new economic outlook, who were the leaders of this new initiative, and then how they were able to establish these socialist ideas into national movement, and whether those ideas achieved something or not, or whether they were only ideas. And as I have told, that when we were talking about freedom movement, we were not only talking about the political freedom, we were talking about the freedom from the all ills of our society. And when we were talking about all ills, that social equality, economic inequality were important obstacles in evolution of Indian society. And that's why the new leadership which emerged during 90s, 20s and 30s, because of Russian Revolution, the concept of social economic justice which was provided, and the need to consolidate the Indian national movement, include more people into the nationalist fold, they brought socialist economic ideas, and they focused on the issues of peasants, workers, and rural masses, women, all these things. And its leadership was provided by individuals like Subhash Chandra Bose, Jawaharlal Nehru, Jayaprakash Narayan, Acharya Narendra Dev. The reasons were the rise of working class in India because of economic progress, the economic depression in the world, Russian Revolution, need to bring masses to the nationalist movement. And these ideas were reflected into different steps which were taken in this period. The one of the most important step was the Karachi Congress session adopted a new economic policy and a resolution on fundamental rights, which talked about workers' rights, reforms in agriculture and peasantry, establishment of National Planning Committee in 1938. During the same time period, Kisan Sabhas trade unions were established all over India to bring this working class into the nationalistic fold. Nehru specifically said that political freedom was meaningful only if it led to the economic participation of the masses. So all these new ideas and new institutions were being established during this time period. But when we analyze their success, we can say that because of British rule, these people were not exercising powers. The power was being exercised by British. And British always played divide and rule policy. Through these means, they tried to implement divide and rule policy. The legislatures were filled with jamidars, landlords, or the capitalists, and they were not having a sympathetic view of the socialist ideas. And that's why the socialist leaders like Nehru and Bose, they always had to make some compromise for the need of Indian national movement. But we must say that these efforts which were being made during this time period, they were not going to be washed away. India's preamble, DPSPs of India's constitutions, all reflect the aspirations which were reflected during 1920s and 30s. And the agriculture reform, planned economic development which India took after independence, they were all inspired by efforts which were made during that time. So all these things you have to mention in this question. My next question is, non-alignment movement as a centerpiece of India's foreign policy in post-independence was a unique characteristics Indian foreign policy having its root in Indian freedom struggle. Was a unique characteristic of Indian foreign policy having its root in Indian freedom struggle. Now when you are answering this question, you must provide that what was the immediate context of the name. Despite this immediate context, the roots of name policy had lied in India's freedom struggle. We say that the immediate context of name was provided by a division of world into two blocks. The communist bloc led by USSR and the capitalist bloc led by USA, and they were having economic differences, political differences, and because of these differences there were conflict situations in the world, and militarization, arms race was going on. When all these things were happening, Indian leaders realized that India is a newly independent country. It has limited resources, and those limited resources must be used for its development purpose. If we are becoming part of any of the one blocks, India will also have to invest in military, and it will take away its scarce resources. Though in response to those resources, it may get some technical support or economic support from the bloc, but that will take away the freedom for which India was fighting. And that's why India became a leader of the name movement. And this name movement was based on the principles that the countries in the world must cooperate with each other. They must respect each other as equal partners in development, and they must collaborate to remove the hardships of the man, to remove the economic hardships, social hardships of the man. And these principles, all these principles had evolved during Indian freedom struggle, because Indian freedom struggle said that during First World War and during Second World War, Indians specifically asked Britishers that you are saying that these world wars have been fought for democracies, for for what do you say, to protect democracies. And Indian asked, how you are going to apply these democratic principles to us, you must tell. They focused on equality, democracy, development, and all these were again reflected into NAM. And you must mention all these things in your answer. Next question is, what were the circumstances which led to the signing of Shimla Agreement in 1972? Did the agreement fulfill its purpose? What circumstances led to Shimla Agreement in 1972? And did the agreement fulfill its purpose? These two things must be focused. Now, when we are talking about that, what circumstances led to Shimla Agreement in 1972, we must say that two countries were formed in 1947 in South Asia, India and Pakistan, by dividing a single country. And this division had some serious violence. The blood shed was there, and because of this, acrimony was there. But the reason for this bloodshed was the viewpoints of the societies. It was the communalism. And it has been said, though communalism use religion as a tool, but the ultimate aim is to have access to power, access to resources. And the land is always the most important resource. Many say that India must adopt a peaceful approach for resolving disputes with Pakistan. But how can we say that even if we are having a peaceful approach towards Pakistan, Pakistan is trying to establish peace. It is always trying to encroaching on the lands. And that's why, because of this thought, that Pakistan always thought that it is a nation with small area, small population, small economic base, and it will perpetually have a conflict with India for survival. And that's why it tried to increase its area, and for this it fought different wars. And we had three wars: War of 1948, War of 1965, and War of 1971. And this Shimla Agreement was an outcome of the 1971 war, which said, it is being said that after war there was a belief that peace must be established into the South Asia, and for this the Shimla Agreement was formulated and signed. It said that troops will be withdrawn from each other's territories, the prisoners of war will be exchanged, conflict and confrontation between the two countries will be given, and both countries must work towards establishment of durable peace, friendship and cooperation. Both the countries mutually agreed on respecting for each other territorial integrity, sovereignty, non-interference into each other matters, a mutual commitment to the peaceful resolution of all the issues, and to build the foundation of a cooperative relationship. But as previously I have said, that sometimes ideas and aspirations are only written in books. The real intentions are different, and as long as those intentions are different, then the agreements, the ground reality will also be different. And it was again reflected into Kargil event in 1999, various terrorist attacks, and the policy of Pakistan bleeding India through million cuts. And as long as Pakistan adopts this policy, 1972 Shimla Agreement cannot be established in totality, and all the objectives which were thought by it cannot be achieved. And that's why we can say that 1972 agreement has not been able to achieve the aspirations which were set by it, because of the different objectives of military establishment of Pakistan and their political establishment. Now next question is, examine critically the various facets of economic policies of the British in India from mid-18th century till independence. When we are talking about this question, I would like you to recall that part in which I said that societies will always interact, but the objective of interaction will be different, whether they are interacting for cooperation, for conflict, or for domination. We can have different modes, military modes, economic modes, and political modes to achieve these interactions. This question talks about what was economic interaction between these two societies and what was its objective. And it is certainly Britishers were having an objective of domination, and for that they used different economic policies. Agriculture economic policy, industrial economic policy, policy of commercial policies. All these economic policies were ultimately aimed at exploiting India, taking the resources away from India and benefiting British at the cost of India. The Zamindari system, the land revenue system in agriculture ultimately benefited Britishers. It resulted into deterioration of the Indian agriculture, deterioration of the condition of Indian peasants. Through British commercial policy, in which they applied tariffs on Indian products in Britain, they allowed low-cost procurement of raw material from India and selling of products at high cost, resulted into deindustrialization of India and led to impoverishment of India. Therefore, when question says that examine critically the various facets of economic policies of British in India from mid-18th century till independence, we have to focus on all these aspects. That through different policies, they tried to establish a capitalist system in which they were trying to impoverish India and benefit Britain at any cost. The next question is, the British policy on imperialism and its attitude towards India was never uniform and changed from time to time to suit its colonial ambitions. Elaborate reasons and examples. This question is again focusing on that aspect, that the ultimate objective of British in India was to dominate India, to consolidate their positions in India. But they used different tools during different times. Now, when we are talking about establishing colonies, there are certain events which take place. First is enter into the colony, then is remove competitors from the colony, isolate your colony from the internal or external threats, make them subordinate, and then finally completely take over those territories. When these territories have been taken over, if these territories are being inhabited by some real men, they will revolt. When they are revolting, the colonial rulers will give some relaxation. Now they will give some relaxation, but they will always use divide and rule policy to remain relevant there, to have a hold over the system. Therefore, initially when colony is being established, military means will be used. When colony has been subjugated, now they will be using political tools to dominate. And all these sequence of events happened in India through different policies of different governor generals or viceroys. If we look at some of the policies which must be mentioned in this question, is the policy of ring fence, the policy of subsidiary alliance, the policy of doctrine of lapse, and then after revolt of 1857, the policy of annexation which was abandoned, and the native princes were given assurance that their territories will not be annexed unless and until they do something which harm the British interest. And the question asks, you have to mention these policies, that how the policies changed. Initially, when we are talking about the policy of ring fence, before policy of ring fence, the Britishers tried to defeat foreign powers of Dutch and French by using internal conflicts of Indian princes. Whether it was Hyderabad or Carnatics, foreign powers took sides and Britishers defeated the other powers, and therefore through these defeats of French and Dutch, they were able to remove their competitors from the Indian space. When they have removed foreign competitors, now their objective was to gain more and more influence into Indian states. So what they came up with was the policy of ring fence. In policy of ring fence, they will consolidate power over a region, and they will ring fence it so that other outside powers doesn't interfere or does not threaten their interest in that particular province. After that, they will enter into a subsidiary alliance with that province. In that subsidiary alliance, that province or a state will be given a subsidiary status. That state will disband its army, it will be dependent on the army of the British, and it will ultimately result into weakening of the province. And when it has sufficiently weakened, they used doctrine of lapse. The kings were removed on basis of various allegations or on the basis of various provisions of the doctrine of lapse, that if a king was not having a legal heir, he was removed. All these things were done. But then, when many of Indian provinces were subjugated under these different policies, British power was consolidated. It resulted into impoverishment of Indian people. It resulted into disenchantment of the different classes like religious classes, kings, zamindars, and it resulted into 1857 revolt. After that revolt, they again tried to placate the Indians, and now the system was changed to that we will give assurance to princes. Their territories will not be taken. Participation of Indians in administrative sphere, religious sphere was ensured. And therefore, now what they were saying, we are playing the policy of divide and rule. We are taking some of the sections of society with us and we are leaving others behind, so that a united front is never developed. But despite all these efforts of Britishers, India was able to provide a united front to British policies and through various institutions which were developed in 20th century, India was finally able to get complete independence from Britain. You have to mention all these things in this question. Now, the next question is, the peasant movement in India failed to take the shape of a national movement because of too much focus on regional agenda with regional leaders. Examine the statement. That is the same thing which I discussed, that when two systems are competing or fighting, they must fight on equal terms. If any of the system is not attacking on the roots, is not attacking holistically, it is not going to win. And the same thing happened with Indian peasant movement. Indian peasants were suffering from poverty. They were being impoverished by British economic policies. They were under debt. They were forced to do bega. They were forced to enter into illegal and exploitative contracts. And all these resulted into different hardship for these peasants. But their hardships were not because of the contracts in which they entered or the money lenders, but these hardships were because of the capitalist system. Because in the capitalist system, the industries must get raw material at low cost to maximize their profits. And also they should sell their products to the masses. And therefore, the farmers were brought into this vicious cycle. And this resulted into their impoverishment. Therefore, capitalism, colonialism was the reason for their suppression and exploitation. But the means of this colonialism and capitalism were the local zamindars and money lenders. And the peasant movements always focused on these zamindars and money lenders. They were never able to attack the capitalism and colonialism. So even if you are killing a local zamindar, you are killing a local money lender, you are taking their books of entry and all these things, you are not going to remove your problems. It is only a time gap solution. Again, new zamindars will come, new money lenders will come, they will again exploit it. This is the same kind of thing which is happening nowadays. That farmers, they take loans from the banks and the markets. Then after 7 to 8 years, they demand that their loans must be waived off. Though even politicians waive off their loans, farmers are not going to benefit from these things. So, at this point of time also, farmers were not having a holistic understanding of the system, how system is working, and they were only attacking the means. They never attacked the main ideology. And this was reflected into different movements which happened during this time period. You had Eka movement, Tebaga movement, not Tebaga was in 1940s. You have Indigo Revolt, Eka movement, and Ramosi peasant movement. All these movements, the leadership was provided by local leaders like Digamba Viswas. But in this question, you must also mention that in the initial phase, the peasant movements were of regional character and leadership was also provided by regional leaders. But as the understanding of colonialism evolved in India, the Drain theory came, Indian intellectual class became much more aware about the negative impacts of British policies. The peasant movements also evolved in their outlook. The Kisan Sabhas, which evolved because of the change in outlook of Indian national movement during 90s, 20s and 30s to socialist outlook. The leadership provided by Acharya Narendra Dev, J.P. Narayan, Jawaharlal Nehru. Indian peasants were brought into national movement, and through this national movement they targeted the basic colonialist or capitalist structure, and they tried to wriggle out their way. But again, British tried to play divide and rule policy, and because Indians were not fully represented in legislatures, the reforms which must have been taken for the farmers' benefit were not done. And this resulted into delay of reforms, and the ultimate benefit of farmers was not done. You must mention all these things in this answer. Now next question. Gandhi has unique ability to turn a class movement into a mass movement. What were the different strategies played by Gandhi in achieving this? When we say that Indians were not fighting only for political freedom, they were thinking of completely re-innovating themselves, establishing themselves as in civilization which has historical roots, which had principles of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which had democracies during Vedic times. Therefore, they were trying to fight Britishers on ethical lines, on values lines. And one of the important principles of these values were that Indians were treating each one of them as equal. Each one of its citizens having capacity to determine their destiny. It simply means they showed faith in the masses. Why they showed faith in masses? Because they needed that masses must participate in the national movement. And Gandhiji did this for the national movement. For this, he used different tools, like his focus on removing untouchability, promoting Hindu-Muslim unity, focusing on charkha, simply wearing dhoti, taking the issues of peasants, taking the issue of salt in national movement. All these ideas resonated with masses, and the masses believed that this man can help them in removing hardships from their life. And that's why he was able to convert India's freedom struggle into a mass movement. You must mention all these things in this answer.